My name is Don Jorgensen. Welcome to our discussion of issues and candidates. With me today in the studio is Mr. Joe Plaia, who is a candidate for Rockingham County Attorney. Joe, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And for those who have not had the pleasure of meeting you, perhaps you'd have an opportunity to tell us a bit about yourself and why you're running.
Sure. I was raised in New Hampshire, and my career has been a criminal justice career. It started out in law enforcement as a military police officer in the Marine Corps. I have been a prosecutor for the New Hampshire State Police, and I've been a public defender as well. I currently have my own private criminal defense practice in Portsmouth. The reason I've decided to run for Rockingham County Attorney is complex, but there are many. One, I've been practicing in this county for about 5 years, and I've had an opportunity to see the inefficiency in which the current county attorney's office prosecutes cases. For example, it has led to overspending. And a perfect example of that is we currently spend over $1 million every single year housing our overflow of offenders in other county jails. Mm-hmm. And we could easily reduce that number by using proven, efficient programs that not only reduce crime, but they save taxpayer money. The current county attorney's office has simply been unwilling or unable to change, and I think it's time for that to happen.
Excellent. Well, thank you on that. Now, you said you were in the military. Which of the services were you in?
I was in the United States Marine Corps.
You were in the Marine. Excellent. Wonderful. Now, so in your reference as well, do I understand correctly that we can have basically better law enforcement at the same cost that we're paying right now without any difficulty?
I believe we can. I think other counties have used these models for several years, other programs that reduce county costs all around. For instance, in Stratford County, they estimate by use of alternative programs, they save up to $8.5 million every year. In Merrimack County, just by utilizing a pretrial services program, they save about $2.8 million every year. So if you're saving that much money without increasing crime, you can utilize that money in other areas. So without increased spending, I think we can cost shift and use it more efficiently.
Wonderful. Well, as I run the numbers out in my brain, that's about $1 million is about, or I should say $2 million is about 20 people, 20 law enforcement officers, or in around
It
that
very
number.
well could be.
It's substantial. Well, we'll get back to some of those points, but first, Joe, for those viewers who are not familiar with the position of county attorney, perhaps you can give us a short description of the duties and responsibilities?
Yes. The Rockingham County Attorney is the chief law enforcement officer of the county. In the absence of the Attorney General, that is the title. Okay. The County Attorney's Office is prosecuting for all felony cases that occur in the county and responsible for prosecuting all misdemeanor cases that are appealed to the Superior Court. Both the duties for my and my opponent would be absolutely the same. We just have a very different philosophical approach on how to go about those duties. My approach is not to just jail everybody regardless of whether they are a violent or nonviolent offender. Let's be honest, violent offenders do belong behind bars. Violent felons belong in state prison. But there are a lot of nonviolent offenders out there committing drug crimes or property crimes that could really use rehabilitation rather than state prison at the expense to the county citizen here in Rockingham. I believe that there's many other duties that are currently not being practiced by the county attorney. Using your professional experience in criminal justice, for instance, would be very beneficial to the legislature when they're passing bills that do impact public safety. The Executive Council, for example, will be deciding whether or not to initiate prison privatization in New Hampshire. My near 20 years experience in the criminal justice system, I think would be very beneficial to the Executive Council in advising them whether or not that's a good idea. And to be clear, I believe it's an absolute terrible idea.
fascinating, but I'm going to ask you, I'm going to push that question just a little bit. You said you think it's a terrible question. I mean, terrible idea.
Yes.
Could you elaborate just a little bit?
Definitely. They've been using this model out west for several years. In fact, there was an article today in the Concord Monitor discussing prison privatization. And the companies that do it they pitch that they can save money. Where they save money, however, is they save money on decreasing the amount of staff, the amount of officers, correctional officers in the prison. They save money by not training these officers sufficiently. They also save money by cutting health care for inmates. What has resulted out west in Arizona and other states that have been using this model is more escapes, more assaults on correctional officers behind prison walls, more wrongful deaths of prisoners behind prison walls. I don't think that's the kind of thing we want to see happen in New Hampshire, and it has been proven that the cost savings, if any, may be as maximum as 1%.
At a substantial cost
Definitely.
in other areas.
Yes.
Unintended consequences, as they say.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Now, we all understand that effective law enforcement comes at a cost. You have made it clear that we could do more to control those costs without reducing effectiveness. Perhaps now you could elaborate on those issues, and I'll kind of turn the camera over to you to express that.
Sure. There are several programs available to law enforcement and prosecution that are more effective than the traditional approach of just convict, jail, and then through a revolving door see that person again and again and again. These programs are diversion, for example. To explain diversion, diversion is a program usually set aside for youthful offenders. For the majority of the time, they're drug offenses and they're nonviolent offenses. And the perfect example is the 18-year-old who gets stopped for speeding on the highway, subsequently is asked to have his vehicle searched, agrees, and maybe is found to have 3 types of prescription drugs on him, 3 pills, if you will. Those pills, each one of them is a felony level offense. Now, if this 18-year-old is convicted, this 18-year-old is now a felon. This 18-year-old no longer can get financial aid for college. Diversion, what diversion does is it brings you into a program where there are random drug tests, where there's community service, where you pay substantial fines, which are usually equal to the fines that you would receive with conviction. And they usually last about 6 months for misdemeanor diversion, maybe even up to a year for felony diversion. Merrimack County's program, for example, has been up and running since 1991. They did a study at UNH on the program. I believe the year they did that was 2004. And they had discovered that the program boasted a 15% recidivism rate for youthful offenders that completed the program. And you compare that to an average of 51% through traditional prosecution. It also keeps people out of jail, which in Rockingham County costs over $80,000 a year, nearly $30 a day to house somebody in the House of Corrections in Rockingham County. These nonviolent offenders could be dealt with in a different manner. Their punishment would still be stiff, but yet it would not be at a substantial cost to the taxpayer in this county. Another example of a program is drug court. We currently have a federal grant for a drug court in Rockingham County, which is a $350,000 grant. Now, I went to the criminal justice meeting in April, it was in Rockingham County, and at that point in time, the current county attorney had only referred 7 offenders to the program. At the same time, Stratford County had 54 defendants enrolled in their drug court program. Now, drug courts, they're very similar to diversion in the sense that they put people through drug counseling, they teach life skills, they have to report to the court. There are consequences if they violate the conditions of drug court, they go through drug testing. But the big thing is what they do is they rehabilitate the drug offender so that they get the addicted person off of drugs and becoming a successful or a contributing member to society. That again is a huge tax saving cost to Rockingham County residents. studies have shown throughout the country that communities that choose to invest in drug courts offer about a 221% return for every dollar they spend. Wow. So in other words, every dollar you spend, you get $2.21 back. It has been proven to be successful throughout the rest of the country, and it also has been proven to be successful in New Hampshire, in Stratford County, in Merrimack County. They're using it in other counties as well. If we don't utilize the drug court to its maximum potential and get offenders in there, when this federal grant runs out, the drug court will be gone forever, and we'll be back to just traditional prosecution, and we'll be in the same place we are now, spending over $1 million every year to other counties to house our overflow of defendants. Mental health court is another court that operates in the same fashion. And this also deals with nonviolent offenders as well, but people with mental illness, again, when they're committing crimes, and those crimes are usually self-medication and nonviolent crimes as well. They go through a mental health court, which they also have in Stratford County, which has proven to be very successful. And that, again, is a huge cost saving to taxpayers. It punishes offenders, but it also ensures that people are getting on the medication they need. They get the diagnosis they need if they're mentally ill. Mm-hmm. And they're not just locked up in jail. Approximately 2/3 of our jail and prison population in the state are people who are either mentally ill, drug addicted, or both. And wow. The majority of those are nonviolent offenders as well.
I did not realize. That's amazing.
Yes. Another idea that I would like to bring to New Hampshire is a veterans court. A veterans court have been popping up around the country, specifically now when we have so many returning that have returned from Iraq and many returning soon from Afghanistan that are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injuries. These veterans, when they come home, a lot of people don't know this, but when they're getting discharged from the military, they're asked if they suffer from a traumatic brain injury or do they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, our men and women, if they answer yes to those questions, they can't go home. They actually are stuck in the military until they've received the treatment that the military believes is necessary to send them back out into society. So those individuals aren't saying yes. They're saying, no, I'm fine. They want to go home.
Sure.
And when they do get home, they're not asking for help. They see that as a sign of weakness. And often, the first time it's noticed that this person is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or something of that nature is a run-in with law enforcement, whether it be possession of drugs, DWIs, or assaults. That's the first time it's noticed. What a veterans court does is it, again, offers an alternative sentencing model. These people are still held accountable for their actions, but veterans courts employ counselors, the VA is involved, the Wounded Warrior Project is involved, and what happens is these people are given the treatment they need, our returning heroes are given the treatment they need, and they are keeping their benefits. If a veteran got arrested or convicted of a drug charge or a felony charge, they're losing those veterans' benefits forever.
Well, they are.
Yes. So if they lose those based on injury or an affliction that they received by going to combat for us, I believe that's a complete miscarriage of justice. We need to do what we can to rehabilitate them and get them right.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. You had reference. Pardon me. I had read some reference to early case resolution.
Yes.
What is that about?
That's something that as far as I know, it's only being practiced in Stratford County. The Stratford County Attorney's Office instituted this a couple of years ago. Now, what this, in order to explain that, I have to explain what vertical prosecution is.
Okay.
Every felony case that starts out in district court. The only authority the district court has over that case is the initial arraignment and what's called a probable cause hearing, to determine whether there was probable cause that a crime, had been committed. Now, in Rockingham County, all the individual police departments and the state police prosecute their own cases at that level. They do those arraignments and they do those probable cause hearings. In Stratford County, the county attorney's office takes the prosecution of that case over as soon as the arrest is made, as soon as the charge is had. So what they do is they put their more senior and experienced attorneys in district court to handle that. And the public defender's office as well puts an experienced public defender in the court. And what they do is they hash out the case pretty much right away if it is a good case for early case resolution. That could be a case that maybe should be brought as a misdemeanor and is dealt with in district court, or it could be a case that should be a felony. In fact, they've done it with sexual assault cases and pled them out to state prison time within the first 2 weeks of the charges being brought.
Amazing.
Because if you're a professional, when you get a case, you know its value right away. I'm sure there's contractors out there who are give an estimate. They know the value of that job right away. Attorneys are no different. There's no point in dragging our feet and taking a year, 2 years, and keeping the court system backed up when you can look at a case, know its value, and work out that plea of guilty and see that justice is done within the first few weeks. The biggest thing that helps out is that it takes that case away from the grand jury. This person, the defendant, waives his right to grand jury indictment, and the county attorney can file informations. And those cases are then brought to Superior Court, and within the first few weeks, those cases are pled as guilty pleas, and that person is sentenced. Taking the case away from the grand jury saves another amount of money that we can't even put a finger on, really. Stratford County has taken their grand jury time from 2 days down to a half a day.
Wow.
With that. Our grand jury currently meets for an average of 3 days when the grand jury meets to hear all these cases to decide whether or not they should be indicted. If we instituted early case resolution and these other programs that I've discussed, we could easily, I believe, take that down to a day and a half, saving our citizens time and money, saving our county a lot of money.
And also, I would assume taking the policeman out of the equation so he doesn't have to be, the trooper doesn't
Absolutely.
have to be spending, or police officer spending time in court when he could be out providing service.
Absolutely.
Where
You
it's
can be out
desperately
on
needed.
the street enforcing the law.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Now, you talked about nonviolent offenders as a reference difference. And you talked about some of the things that can be done. Obviously, you're talking about those, you were just talking about them. How best do we address the nonviolent offender versus the violent offender?
Right. I did mention before, I believe the programs that are available are mental health courts, drug courts, veterans courts, and diversion. That's how you address the nonviolent offender, and that's how you save the county millions of dollars every year. That's what they've been doing in Stratford County. That's what they're doing in Merrimack County. We need to implement that here. But there's another thing that I did not touch on that we don't have in Rockingham County that they have in Stratford and Merrimack County and other counties as well, and that's pretrial supervision. Pretrial supervision could both be for nonviolent offenders or violent offenders. Now, in Merrimack County, for example, this is the one I just mentioned briefly in the beginning that saves about $2.8 million a year in housing costs, because the pretrial supervision program costs them $10.50 per day per defendant, as opposed to nearly $30 a day. They have about 120 people in that program at any given time. Now, in Rockingham County, we have 4 people on pretrial supervision, or we did as of April. We really have virtually no budget for that. Merrimack's budget for that is $450,000 a year. And again, look at the return, $2.8 million.
Sure.
Now, the great thing about this program is these people are being supervised. It may be via electronic monitoring, through reporting to the pretrial services program. Again, random drug tests are applied to drug offenders. They're identified by professionals whether or not they need some counseling. Then the rehabilitation process doesn't start a year later or 6 months later when they go to trial. The rehabilitation process starts immediately,
Right away.
as soon as the arrest is done, when somebody is put on pretrial services. And again, they have this program in Stratford County as well. The other benefit to pretrial services is there are violent offenders that can make their bail. There are violent offenders out there that come up with $10, $20, $50, $100,000 cash and make their bail. So if that violent offender makes their bail, what do we do with them if we don't have a pretrial services program? That person is out there unsupervised,
Free on the street.
free on the street. If at least we could put that person on electronic monitoring, give them a curfew, say you're only going to work and home. And that's the other thing that pretrial services does. It allows people to keep work. It allows the family unit to stay intact. It allows families not to go on government assistance because either the husband or the wife are out there working and providing for their family instead of sitting in jail. And it saves taxpayers, again, millions of dollars every year.
Outstanding. The way we talked about diversion, we talked about the drug court and trial services, this program. You mentioned the Veterans Court already,
Yes.
which is certainly a critical aspect to help those that have fought for our country in every sense of the word and have problems that need consideration as opposed to being just dropped off and left to their own devices. And then, of course, on mental health. But there are some other issues out there that need to be addressed as well, and I would like your input on what we can do to address domestic abuse.
Okay. Well, there's two things that I believe as county attorney I would consider my responsibility to do to address domestic abuse. Number one, there are federal grants out there available to establish domestic violence units within prosecution offices. Again, this is something Stratford County takes advantage of every year. And they have a couple of attorneys and staff and victim witness advocates that are solely dedicated to the prosecution of domestic violence abusers. This is their profession. That's what they do. And I believe that would be helpful in this county as well, because domestic violence is something that is always on the rise, and it's always a problem, and it needs to be stopped.
Absolutely.
Beyond that, there are bills that from time to time go through our legislature that are very dangerous to victims of domestic violence. And one such bill went through the legislature recently. Luckily, it was voted down. But it was a bill that would have said a law enforcement officer could not make an arrest in a domestic violence situation unless they had personally observed the abuse themselves. So when you have a couple at home and one calls 911 because they're getting beaten, if the police arrive and let's just say they come upon a woman who has a black and blue face, who's bleeding, they cannot make an arrest in that situation if that bill had been successful in the legislature this year. In my mind, that's my responsibility as an almost 20-year career criminal justice professional to be on that House floor, really testifying in front of the legislature about how many lives that the current law has saved that was implemented back in the 1970s and how we cannot take that backward.
Absolutely. Wow, that's amazing. That domestic abuse issue is something that's it's so prevalent within our society, and yet there are some people that seem to want to just hide their head in sand or ignore that it's the case. I don't understand the logic, but that's me. What about assistance with community correction centers?
Absolutely. Well, the basis of community correction centers really are these programs that I've been discussing all along. So when you build a community correction center, or which you don't have to build, there's plenty of vacant land and buildings on our county land that we could take that $1.1 million we're spending this year back into county and put it into community correction center. This would cover pretrial services. It could cover diversion. It could cover drug court. It could cover mental health court and veterans court. All that money could be going into what we call community supervision, pre-trial and post-trial. That when these people are sentenced or before they're sentenced, this is supervising them in the community via the ways I'd mentioned earlier, electronic monitoring and so forth. Community corrections is an integral part of several other counties. Like I said, Stratford probably has the most effective and the largest program there is. Just back in April, they had 430 some odd offenders out on community supervision at one time.
Wow.
That's how much money they put into that program, and it's, again, that total budget for that, for all their programs was $1.2 million last year, but they estimated they saved up to $8.5 million because of it.
Wow. So it's again, an issue of cost savings, but also
Without risk to public safety.
yeah, and they're returning people to be productive citizens is really what it boils down to
Yes.
some extent at least.
Yes.
Well, let's move on then, really to the, I guess one could say, final principle question here. What do you see as the principal priorities of the county attorney to make our county safer? And
Okay.
you've obviously stated a lot of them,
Sure.
but perhaps you could summarize.
Sure. Well, it's really no secret that the way to effective law enforcement, the way to deter crime, is to actually have a sufficient amount of law enforcement out there on the street deterring crime. There's a recent commercial for something lately that just shows that it's pretty comical, actually, but it's true. And I can tell you that as my experience as a military police officer, when we were shorthanded, there's the enlisted club. Every Thursday night was the big night of the enlisted club. Now, when we weren't shorthanded, we had about 4 police cruisers and about 12 military police officers surrounding and walking around that place when it let out
Sure.
at the end of the night. Usually nothing would happen. But when we only had 1 cruiser and 1 military police officer there, sure enough, every single night there were fights that broke out. Every single night there were places that got broken into or vandalized. Young Marines, both men and women, got out there and they get into trouble too, just
Sure.
like anybody else. Seen that same effect happen in our county. When I was going to law school, I actually did security at a bar in Portsmouth. It had helped me get through law school working a job like that. Every single night there was usually 1 or 2 state police cruisers, 2 or 3 police cruisers from the Portsmouth Police Department, liquor enforcement, maybe even a county sheriff's cruiser, all around the area when these bars let out. And you'd see these people going towards their cars, seeing that, and not getting in their car and going and calling a cab. Or you'd see guys coming out acting aggressive, wanting to get in fights, but no, they didn't because they saw what was out there facing them.
Sure.
Now, you fast forward to this year. At the beginning of the year, violent crime was up all over the county. In Portsmouth alone, the Portsmouth Police Department said that it was up 300% this year. Wow. They had a lack of that law enforcement out there on the street at night. So when these bars let out, when the places closed, there were crimes when people were trying to walk home.
Sure.
There were muggings. There were assaults and fights outside the bar, and DWI went up. Compare that to St. Patrick's Day, when they made an effort to publicize it in the paper that we were going to saturate the seacoast this weekend. There was not 1 DWI on St. Patrick's Day. The law enforcement was out, the checkpoints were out, and it was in the paper. By instituting all these cost-saving measures that I'm talking about,
Sure.
we can shift that cost to the police departments, save them money in a lot of other areas, save the county a lot of money in a lot of other areas, and put the money where it's needed, and put those police officers on the street so they can be out there and citizens can be safe.
So it's not a cost to the police, it's a cost savings. So that provides more feet on the street, and as you said, police on the street reduce crime. It's as simple as that.
It is as simple as that.
Well, since the issues we discussed were somewhat limited, are there other comments you would like to make? I will turn the camera over to you.
Thank you. We have talked about a lot of issues today and a lot of programs that are out there. I am prepared to do everything I had said here today to get the grants available to establish Veterans Court and domestic violence units. I also believe that your current leadership has had 14 years to look at what works and implement these programs. And during his tenure, the county has gotten more violent crime is up, and we are still going backward. I think it's time to institute these programs that have been successful in other counties, and I would like to be that county attorney to bring Rockingham County at level with Stratford County, Merrimack County, and maybe even a little further ahead.
Joe, Plaia, thank you for joining us and giving the citizens of our town the opportunity to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much.
With that, thanks for listening to us today, and good day.